Hi, welcome to AsianAviation.com. I'm Matt Driskill in Singapore. Today we are presenting a very interesting recap of the 2019 Paris Air Show by the well-known British consultancy IBA. IBA monitors and tracks data on the aviation industry and produces the IBA IQ database that provides market intelligence on aviation leasing, operating, finance, and the MRO community worldwide. The session is about 40 minutes long, and it is well worth investing a little time to learn more about what happened at Paris and a little bit about the outlook for the rest of the year. For AsianAviation.com, I'm Matt Driskill in Singapore.
Hello everyone, and welcome to IBA's Paris Air Show webinar. My name is Melissa Wybrow, Marketing Manager, and I'm joined by Phil Seymour, CEO, Stuart Hatcher, CEO and Managing Director of Aviation, Mike Yeomans, Head of Valuations, and Hash Haywasam, Senior Aviation Analyst. Welcome everybody. Today's session will be a round table chat, covering the events of last week's show, what happened and also what didn't happen, and we're also going to throw in a quick look at the year ahead towards the end. We have allowed some time for questions. If you've got any that you would like to put forward, please do submit them using the question pane on the screens. So let's get started. Phil, I believe you're going to kick off.
Yes, thanks, Melissa. Welcome everybody. I hope you've all returned back from Paris safe and well. I noticed the temperature is about 15 centigrade higher than it was last week, so I'm glad it isn't this week. So I thought we'd just start off again reminding ourselves of how we entered the Paris Air Show, and we've got a slide here on airline bankruptcies. It wasn't a great picture, was it, Stu, in terms of where the industry was?
No, it's right. Leading into the show, unprecedented number of bankruptcies year to date so far in history. So we've certainly seen with, if we're assuming, Jet goes through to completion, and then we have Avianca Brazil and other airlines like Germania, we have seen a staggering rise of default within the industry, which, as the slide shows, the data from IQ shows there that we've got aircraft well in excess of 250 already just by the middle of the year. So it's a very cautious approach and seeing where the airlines will be able to get through the summer period, retain that cash, and whether they can get through the full year. So certainly we weren't going into the show with any sort of level of optimism, and we really believe that there was going to be a relatively subdued showing at the show.
Yeah, I think as just to make more of an upbeat view as well, though, we still see a huge number of inquiries from investors who want to get into this space because the mobile nature of aircraft, the US dollars, there is an attraction to invest in aircraft. So I suppose the way I see it is that if we look at the period we had, probably relatively few failures between 2015 and 2018, that was kind of unusual, really.
Yeah,
if
you look at those years just there, really only ones that sort of jump out are airlines such as Munich, Air Berlin, where we had a very quick response to the market to place the aircraft. And if you look at the aircraft that have even defaulted this year, there's been a really staggering increase in lease placements. So of the sort of 400 or so aircraft that have gone through a lease end period since the beginning of the year, well over 200 have already placed. So a large number of the jet aircraft, we've seen a good number that have been going off to SpiceJet, and they've even created a business class model to take advantage of some of those seats. So there is plenty of opportunity in there. And of course, one thing that we see with Jet, taking that capacity out of the India market will give a boost.
Yeah.
So we were expecting that.
We're actually going to come back to this slide later as well. So before we make it too much of an industry overview, we'll move on to where we thought Paris would be, because we issued our predictions a couple of weeks ago. So how did we do it? What did we think was going to happen? What were the notable events there?
Well, we were very close actually in terms of the overall numbers of firm orders,
MOUs and LOIs that we expected. So we were around just short of 700 in terms of the actual result. We were only 30 shy of that in terms of our predictions, although there was some difference in terms of the number of firm and MOU compared to letters of intent. But we were actually expecting, we did put our cards on the table and mentioned our expectations of what sort of announcements would be made at the event. And we were expecting an XLR launch. That did come to fruition. We saw around 216 commitments for that aircraft, of which 78 were conversions from existing orders. Mm-hmm. We weren't expecting to see an NMA launch, and we didn't. So we were correct on that point as well. We expect to see Boeing set out some more information on the re-entry of the MAX and some more detail on that. I mean, that's something that we're hearing a lot in the news and in the media, and that's something that really doesn't escape any of our attention at the moment. Mm-hmm. Very in the forefront of people's minds. We were perhaps surprised to see such a large commitment and from IAG as well, with 200 a letter of intent for 200 aircraft there.
Okay.
With Mitsubishi as well, the SpaceJet, the sort of rebranded MRJ, we saw it's not the MRJ 70 but the M100, which looks to be a very much scope clause busting aircraft. It's very much aimed at that US market, 76 seat capacity, and we did see an undisclosed commitment for that aircraft as well.
Yeah, I mean that we come on to some of the specific orders, but that sort of scope clause aircraft, we saw United ordering more Embraer 175E ones as part of that. So it definitely is a big market. It's probably 400 or 500 aircraft that need to be replaced in the coming years, so far as I understand. But let's should we have a look now at the predictions in a bit more detail? Can you just explain this graph? There's a lot of orange and reds and blues and greens here. So just give me a bit of guidance on what I'm looking at here.
Yeah, so if you look at the orangey red bars, those are IBA's predictions. So we actually published, and this is on our website, how many firm MOUs, LOIs, and for each aircraft type we thought that they were going to be. And then the bluey green bars show what actually happened. As you can see, there are some differences there. But if you compared, interestingly, if you compared the 737 MAX and A320neo family, the total volume of commitments is very close in terms of what we predicted and what actually happened. It's just that perhaps driven by the issues around the MAX, we thought that the commitments would be stacked more favourably towards the 320neo family, but obviously the big commitment from IAG pushed the balance the other way a little bit there. We did expect some commitments for the A220, but not quite as many as actually came. So it seems to be establishing itself well, that aircraft, and picking up some good demand. The wide body orders, although there were a few, were slower than we perhaps expected. Although we saw some 330neo commitments, we didn't see any for the A350. There were none for the 777X either. So there was some definitely slowness in terms of the large wide bodies.
And did we? I know we said we thought the A321 XLR may be launched, but we didn't associate that with any particular orders, did we? Initially, we thought it would just be launched, but here we go. Yeah. Here's a commitment to an order for A321 XLRs from both airlines and ALC, of course. So, okay, yeah, I think we were, I suppose, looking at some of those wide body areas. I mean, it seems if we thought 777X may get a bit of attention along with the A350, but there was nothing really in that big wide body sector.
No, I suppose in the prediction we were also expecting something from Saudi, Korean, and a few other large carriers who we knew that were, and people like Thai looking at replacing their long haul fleet, which was where those 777Xs were positioned. Because leading up to the show, of course, we had Boeing and Airbus actually having a positive backlog in the wide body space as opposed to the narrow body space, where they had the cancellations in the narrow body space and the wide body had taken over that. So we had gone in fairly unprecedented into a show where we had such a strong wide body presence in there. We'd already seen IAG place an order for triples, and we've seen Lufthansa come in as well with 78s and 350s. So that's pretty much where the background for that. And in this show, we actually saw Saudi and Korea come good in that with some expansion of that, albeit not necessarily in the wide body space.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Okay. Well, we've done enough on that one, Mike. Should we move on to the next slide? Are you happy to progress? So let's have a look then at the past orders. Let's go back to sort of, this is alternate years. So we have FAS, the Farnborough Air Show in 2012, then Paris Air Show 2013. As we all know, they alternate amongst the odd and even years. What's the takeaway point from this one then, really?
Well, one thing that we like to show is the correlation between the oil price and the number of new aircraft orders at the air shows and in general, really. And you can see that as oil rises, so do orders typically, and when the oil price falls, the orders tend to fall away as well. And you have seen a decline generally over the past year. So the $65 we're at on the barrel of oil Brent at the moment. So we have seen a decline on that basis. If you take out the letters of intent, though, in terms of this year's air show orders, you drop down to a very low number in the sort of 240, 250 range. So it'll be interesting to see over the course of the rest of the year what happens with those orders. We tend to hear these announcements in the middle of the year, and then there's a big sort of rush come December getting those firmed up to see what actually plays out in terms of the firm order book. So
and some of the orders this show were just confirming ones that were earlier in the year anyway.
There were, yes, there was lots of conversions of existing orders. There was
announcements of undisclosed.
So trying to generate a bit more excitement than perhaps.
So
warrants.
Just to clarify then, for the for people who actually don't know about ordering aeroplanes, I mean, I can understand firm is firm. That's the best type of order you can place in the eyes of an OEM, a firm order. Are these in order then? So an MOU ranks more highly than an LOI, and does that ranks more highly than options? Is that a general?
Yeah, in a way, we try to think that the MOU is more legally binding than the LOI.
Yep.
Although realistically, we've seen some very attractive pricing of MOUs and going back over time. So it's always tenuous, really looking more heavily at the firm, but we have seen a lot more MOU conversions going forward, or announcements of MOU conversions going forward.
Because I suppose the standout point for me when I look at this is if I'm looking at the dark blue point, the firm orders, those obviously track the same oil that we're looking at there, but that's that's the lowest it's been for the last 7-8 years.
Yeah, it's terrible since oil dropped.
Yeah,
it's and the backlogs are still gigantic, and we're still seeing a lot of year-end stuffing in terms of December pushes up with the new orders that are coming through, undisclosed, quite large numbers of undisclosed, and then the subsequent year or years we see those being firmed up. But generally at the show we're seeing airlines or lessors who are still working through the deal, working through the details of the deal, and then they get announced further down the line.
Yeah, I think it was we've said before that I think OEMs play it fairly cool. They'll just say, well, an air show is just an air show. It's the year end that matters. But it is a good metric. This is halfway through the calendar year, of course. So it's it's a reasonable representation. I suppose I do question this, I think we're saying there is some correlation between oil price and orders, but I suppose I'm thinking, well, is that because when oil price was high, if we look back at 13, 14, that meant the oil producing states felt more confident to order a lot of aeroplanes. So is it not necessarily about the oil price per se and airlines looking to order more fuel efficient aeroplanes? I just wonder if it's, it's not necessarily a correlation between, right, we've got to order aeroplanes because oil price is high.
But you have an unprecedented number of new aircraft launches in this period as well.
Yep.
So you have a lot of wide bodies that have been launched in that 12, 13, 14 period. So we saw a lot of the 330 Neos and 777Xs being ordered in those
350s there,
those ones in that 13, 14. Well, that was launched much further before, but in terms of the 787-10 model was launched within that period.
Yeah.
The 777X program was launched in that period. So that always tends to get obviously that sudden rush to make a big announcement, and obviously the OEMs want to do that. But also we had a number of aircraft entering service for the first time during these shows, and there was a number of those we've seen in the past with the Paris Air Show when the Neo entered service just in time for it. The 350 got out just in time for it, and there's been a lot of PR around those. But of course, the age of the aircraft has been aging. There's been a large refleeting program going on. And now we're not dealing with just a couple of years of delivery. We're now dealing with what you're going to do in 10 years, not just 2 or 3 years down the road.
Yeah. Okay. And then I always fascinating, of course, to look at the split between airline orders and lessor orders. So I think the next slide coming up is where we kind of look at that sector. So tell us about these two graphs here then, Hash, the one on the left and right there. What's the exciting takeaways from these ones?
Yeah, from the left graph, gives a breakdown of the aircraft orders by each class. So narrow body, wide body, regional, and turboprop against the oil price volatility. From the first graph, you can see the majority of the orders in this year was for the narrow body aircraft, about 152 firm and MOU. We deliberately left the letter of intent orders because they're not legally binding, like Stu mentioned earlier.
Okay.
As you can see, the orders have declined a lot over the compared to last few years. Like Mike's mentioned, definitely the wide body aircraft orders have declined, and there's only one firm order from Virgin Atlantic for 330 Neos, which highlights the weakened demand for the wide body market. There was a slight increase in the regional jet market. There were about 37 firm orders from multiple operators.
Yeah.
Moving on to the next slide, gives you a market share from the lessor versus airlines in terms of the orders. Again, we only focus on the firm and MOU orders. In 2019, there were 32 firm and MOU orders from the lessors compared to 238 in 2018. So it's a massive drop.
Yeah.
Again, airlines, although they ordered more than the lessors, there was still a drop between the orders compared to the last air show. I suppose in recent times, the SLB market has been very competitive. So I think the lessors sort of moved away from the SLB, the SLB transaction, and sort of focused on the ordering aircraft directly from the OEMs. And we have seen that in the past few months leading up to the air show.
But that is really a standout. I mean, we're down there at about just above 10%. Is that 10% of orders being made by lessors? But typically, I think we see sort of 20%.
At least 20% generally, unless of course you go back 2017 where we saw nearly half. And that's really when if you look at the yield curves of sale leasebacks, we saw a large number of the bigger lessors jumping in 2017 to take advantage of that, were the ones with bigger marketing teams who were able to place those aircraft. And then in the last 12 months, we've certainly seen more of a difficulty for some lessors to place certain types of aircraft. I mean, we certainly know that there were quite a lot of unplaced Maxes that the lessors had on order, whereas they'd had less trouble with the Neo. But of course, it's when you're looking at the timeline between when you've got to get the seats ordered and for when you're placing those in, you know, you're already in an 18-month period. So if you can't get those placed, then it becomes a little bit difficult and more challenging. And generally speaking, the yields there that quite often they're seeing in the market have been quite poor. You know, for the effort that they're putting in to try and take that risk on. So certainly in the order stream we saw this year, we certainly saw some proactive orders from lessees that have stipulated that some of these aircraft are placed with a lessor.
Yeah.
And so we've seen ALC appear several times this year of having placements with a number of carriers out of those orders.
Yeah.
And for some wide body aircraft as well.
Yeah. It seems to me, I mean, ALC, you know, getting into that A321 XLR very early, that
I mean, that was to be expected.
Yeah. That shows a commitment from the very experienced team at ALC, as if they've almost been twisting Airbus's arm to get this aircraft launched. So we see if we get any comments on that from people listening. But I you know, for me, it is going to fill that slot, and I'd like to just talk about that NMA. We said that we weren't expecting NMA to be launched, but A321 XLR. Is it going to kick the NMA out of the park? You know, Airbus taking an advantage of offering a single aisle aircraft versus, you know, what we understand Boeing to be coming out with a twin aisle mid-market aeroplane. So Yeah.
Are we going to have a niche fleet in there, and what that's going to do to pricing as well? So you know, it's getting quite toppy on some of those A321s in terms of the pricing we've seen. And then you think, okay, where does that headroom get you up to the lowest end of where we've seen some of the wide body deals? And so that space is getting narrow. Yeah.
As far as I just want to go look here at the lessors again, because so we had mentioned ALC being present at the show, and then NAC, Nordic Aviation Capital, sort of grabbing hold of more ATRs and several options on there. I think it's sort of over 100 if you include all of the options, and the 20 A220 orders. I don't know if they were dash 100s or 300s off the top of my head, and sorry to put you on the spot, but at least that appears to be a step in the right direction for the Airbus team who've taken over that program. And so far as I understand, that the A220 has entered service pretty well with Air Baltic and Swiss. So it seems to be heading in the right direction, at least, after a little bit of being in a bit of a stagnant market.
And I don't think we've seen reliability issues.
No,
the larger variants of the engine.
on the GTF
yeah.
engine, yeah, not yet at least. Maybe that's because they're not operated in really tough environments, but that's a whole new engine webinar we can have on that one at some later date. So just looking again, these wide body orders, A320neo, that's come out of the blocks again. We've had Cebu Pacific jumping in on that. I mean, that is the sweet spot, isn't it? The 330neo was aimed at that Southeast Asia market. So I was going to go back to the predictions. Had we thought 330neo was going to get some attention at this show?
We did think so. Yeah, we thought that the wide bodies generally might have a bit more demand, might see a bit more demand than actually they did. But 330neo was an area that we highlighted. We are seeing somewhat of a trend in the market that operators are not going for those very large aircraft. Obviously, the cessation of production announced for the 380, not so many orders for the 777X, although we've seen the BA IAG order earlier in the year. So seems operators favouring the flexibility and the low costs of the sort of mid-size, longer range aircraft like 330neo, 787s.
Yeah, personally, it would be a shame to see the A380 disappear over the next decade or so, but moving swiftly on. I think as far as I think that the MAX, just want to come back to the MAX again, because I suppose it's been an unprecedented period for any aircraft type to have the accidents and loss of life, the grounding. IAG with the committing to 200 of these aeroplanes. Do we know where they're headed yet? Do we think they're all going into BA, or is it going to be one of the other IAG subsidiaries?
Well, based on the size of their narrow body fleets, you would expect it to be a little bit spread. But it is a stark change in tack to go from an airline, BA particularly, which has had a very Boeing wide body, Airbus narrow body feel. Although BA of course did have 73 classics before, to appear to be making that switch over, that transition, that fleet switch over to the MAX. It's a pretty big change. And we had it the prediction that potentially it could be a top up Ryanair LOI. That was just based on what we've been seeing in the chatter.
Oh, so our 75
was purely a Ryanair LOI style thing. Yeah,
okay, fine.
That was O'Leary trying to take advantage of the situation and going for a mates rates LOI.
Okay, excellent. I just wanted to mention the engine side of things briefly. The LEAP seems to have come out on top in terms of getting some commitments for some Neos.
Indigo, yeah, and from Indigo, and some orders from SMBC, Avalon.
Yeah, Avalon was a big one, wasn't it?
Yeah. But Indigo, so here we have an operator who's got GTF engines, and that's a change to the LEAP.
Yeah.
Is that? I'm just wondering of the conversations that then go on amongst the fleet managers there, that they've had enough of the GTF issues.
I mean, you see that in the Chinese fleets. You often, you land at, say, Shanghai or Beijing, and you'll see the same airline in two different bases, one operating the IAE engine and the same airline operating the CFM. When you look at Indigo's backlog, it's pretty significant. So they could be going just for just covering their bases, checking their risk, and keeping up with that backlog and that delivery schedule, and having it split. Or it could well be a we're changing situation. Now, most of the Indigo aircraft don't tend to stay in the airline for particularly long compared to, say, some other regions of the world. We see a large number of 6-year terms, and so the fleet churn is particularly quick. So there could be more to read into it, or it may be relatively just a dispersion of risk.
Okay, Good. Any other comments from the team here on those sectors, or should we move on to the key points? And yeah, I think we'll move on to the next slide.
So just going back to this slide again with the failures, I mean, really, it's just where do we think it's going to go to next? I mean, we are monitoring a number of airlines which seem to be falling below the red line. But most of the ones we've generally been looking at have been quite small. We don't necessarily have some large carriers that are on the radar just yet. We are forever reminded about when's there going to be the next bankruptcy? Is it going to be Norwegian? Is always the general question that people pose. But and of course they're quite centric to the issues we've seen with the 787 and the MAX grounding as well. So we'll see how they cope with the re-entry into service of the aircraft, because that's essentially going to be like a new aircraft delivering for the first time. It's not really going to be just a re-entry, reactivation of a fleet. They will certainly want to have all the reliability issues or adequately covered. So not really expecting too much activity over the next 3 to 4 months during the Northern Hemisphere summer. And then again, around the end of September, October, we generally tend to see a little bit of a spike, like we do also in the early new year. So we are expecting to probably encroach not towards the 300 mark before the end of summer, but after the end of summer, we are expecting that to creep up. But if we see something nudging that over, we've got some level of uncertainty out there in terms of what oil is doing. We've seen already forecasts at the beginning of June suggesting that we're going to keep up at 75, and then we've seen that come down, and then last Friday we saw another sudden spike again. So it's not really deciding where it wants to go in terms of that. The industry can well and truly handle that sort of level, but if you couple that with foreign exchange, then of course we could be in for a double whammy too.
Yeah, actually, while we're talking about oil price, I just want to go back to my notes because I didn't specifically mention something about the ATR. We mentioned the order that NAC had placed. How much of that do we think was because turboprops and the lower fuel burn compared to regional jets might give airlines a competitive edge? Do you think any of that is because of the concerns there could be about environmental issues and the fuel burn, or was it NAC just looking to gain market share in that sector?
Well, NAC have always been very fond of the aircraft. They have a very large fleet and they're very good at managing regional aircraft, and it's a very specialized sort of area. It's interesting because the ATR market's not particularly strong at the moment in terms of the numbers of available in the market. We're seeing too much out there, but it's whether it's the right aircraft or not.
Yeah.
So these are for new placements of aircraft. There's still quite a lot of older aircraft out there, and so there's a bit of an age gap between the oldest and versus the newest that have to go through. I was actually more surprised that there's still not more regional jet orders considering the age of the fleet. It's getting too old now.
Yeah.
I think the popularity of the aircraft is really good in certain areas of the world, and otherwise it's a little bit more challenging. When we've seen some of the types of credits involved in the ATR and regional jets and that sort of end of the market, if you stay away from some of the larger fleets, we've seen a number of those come out of India. We've seen a number of those come out of Africa. We've seen a lot of airlines with only very small fleets that suddenly can create some availability, and then it gets quickly placed. But if there's anyone to be able to place it, NAC is likely to be the one to be able to do it.
Okay.
I think it's interesting the point that you make, Stu, about the aging fleets. I mean, if you look at the turboprop, especially the sort of smaller turboprop Dash 8 100s, sort of 200, 300s, there's a lot of aging aircraft there that will need to be replaced over the coming years, and I think that's what ATR is really targeting with this new 42-600 short takeoff variant. That picked up several orders at the show, and that could do well going forward to replace those aircraft. I mean, we didn't see much from Viking in terms of its takeover of the Q400 program. There was a Twin Otter order and some CL orders, but nothing really on the larger turboprops. So
I was expecting something more from the bigger size, because it was closed last week, wasn't it? The deal, or the week before last.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Stu. I dropped in
on
on
the
the oil price
42,
there.
on the ATR 42 short thing, it's still not launched yet, though, is it officially?
no, there's some subject.
Those LOIs, I mean, we've classified those as LOIs, but realistically, if we assume that the aircraft is launched, they will raise the figures up in the prediction anyway, because we would class those as firm orders most likely.
Okay. I just want to, we've actually had a question about explaining this airline failures graph, because I think we said that airline failures are at their highest ever. I think that's in terms of
year to date.
Yeah.
At the moment, the chart there, and of course, goes only up to June the 1st, but the little inset charts on the upper left-hand side of the chart there, they are correct as of the year to date position. So if you look at the lower one of those upper left-hand charts, you see the blue line there is as of all that period over the last 10 years, as of June the 1st, we are substantially higher than where we have been before.
Yeah. So although the dotted orange line,
we've still got 7 months to go from that chart before the end of the year.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I hope that explains it. If not, get on to us on the email there. Have you finished your KPIs, or can I carry on?
No, I'm done yet.
Okay, fine, carry on.
Yeah. So if we move over to the next one, so this is just really the KPIs and what we're looking at going forward. So we don't look at the market any longer as a US centric as we've seen before. So the traditional cycle is a little bit more convoluted. There are sort of several cycles on top of one another, and that's the attraction of the industry. One aircraft comes out of one region and placing it into another and take advantage of some of those regional strengths, which has been why we've also seen such a strong component of the leasing market, being able to place those aircraft quickly, as long as there's been good demand. So it's a stranger cycle, because if you look at the normal cycle where we have typical levels of economic depression, or we have fare yields dropping and the fare wars, we're seeing everything all happening at the same time. So it's become a little bit more convoluted. But if we just look at the sort of the 12 points, I mean, oil, we've seen that the forecasts have generally been up, then we see it down, and we see it up. Of course, oil on the way up leads to, of course, to higher costs, new aircraft orders, and a retirement increase. And we've certainly seen an increase in retirement over the last 18 months with some of the uncertainty, but also the creeping up age. Interest rates, we have seen them, swap rates come down 100 basis points since the beginning of the year. Lower cost of acquisition, new aircraft orders, and new lessors appearing. Okay, we haven't really seen much in the way of new aircraft orders for both of those metrics, but certainly the lower cost of acquisition is going to stimulate some those lessors to stay within the industry. Looking at the backlogs and deliveries, stable but high. We're now starting to see them fall for the first time in many years. But leasing demand still increases, but the yields generally are still remaining quite low on that side. Storage and availability has been up. That's generally been part and parcel of the airline failures we've seen. Again, we expect to see a little bit more of a spike in retirements too, and that sort of counteracts some of those orders and giving sort of a headwind for orders as well. The near-term lease ends now. Mike and I did a webcast a couple of weeks back. We're upping our forecast in terms of the lease ends that we're expecting over the sort of short term, the next 3-4 years. That could well spike into an economic life drop, and again another spike in retirements. That will lead to potentially an MRO bottleneck and a lease rate pressure as well. So certainly some of those aircraft on the older end of the spectrum, especially if oil is creeping up, then we expect those to start to retire or convert to freighters if they're the right sort of program. On the aircraft reliability side, we've generally seen a bit more stable. We've seen the engine OEMs take advantage of some of the issues and some of the downtime of the MAX as well, to push in some new improvements into the engine as well that we're expecting to come through. But likewise on the Neo side as well. So we're not seeing that necessarily creeping up. But generally, new aircraft reliability leads to more extensions. Generally, we're seeing that airlines who are not trusting some of that technology, they need to keep the reliability up. But of course, better reliability, more extensions leads to a longer economic life. So a lot of backwards and forwards on here as well. From the airline yield side, we're seeing crashing down, continually coming down. Airline failures then is really where that's sort of being manifesting into as well. But there is still a very strong need to renew that fleet. From the foreign exchange side, stable but high. This is one of the key factors of some of the failures we've seen. Those are, of course, outside of the US, and there is definitely going to be a need to reduce exposure to that foreign exchange. And similarly as well, the GDP growth slowing, falling traffic growth, and a need to manage that capacity to account for that. And so certainly when we look to the Middle Eastern region, we have seen capacity stay relatively high, and we've seen load factors dropping as a result. On the traffic growth generally slowing, needing to manage that capacity, lower fares. Lease yields stable but down, indicating a weaker lessor performance. We have seen some bullish reports from some lessors, and we've also seen some slightly weaker ones in terms of what they would expect to place those aircraft. And then finally, liquidity. We've seen that constantly, far too much liquidity pumping into the market. No shortage of equity, lots of opportunity in terms of deals that can be done. It's just managing that expectation in terms of what yield performs.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to look at the some of the questions we've had in. A couple of them have been about the MAX and valuations of MAX. And actually that does remind me to tell you all that we will be issuing a statement. We haven't figured out whether we're going to do a webinar yet or issue a report, because we really do think it's important for the industry to understand our view of MAX values. Just to give you a clue there, basically our view is that this is where the concept of base value, this is why it was actually defined by ISTAT almost 30 years ago, was to look at the long-term underlying economic value. So without getting into the detail, at the moment we're not changing our pre-grounding opinion of MAX base values, but we'll be going into much more detail in the sort of next week to 10 days as to a sort of a more formal view on that, and how we're approaching it, and how we're when we're talking to investors across various sectors, how they should be dealing with the values of MAX aircraft. I don't know if there's any other questions coming up that I need to refer to. Just give me a second. I covered those.
Yeah.
So I think we're back to you, Mel,
yeah.
actually.
Okay.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That just leaves me to say thank you to Phil, Mike, Stu and Hash, and to everyone for attending today's session. If you do have any other questions, feel free to drop us a line. The email details are on the slides. Talking of which, we will be sending the slides out tomorrow with a link to view the recording of today's session, along with a slide deck. Just a quick note, a quick plug about our data intelligence platform, IBA IQ. The data used in today's session was from that platform. If you've not already taken a look, we are offering free trials and demonstrations of fleets, values and trends, and details of how to register for that are all on the website. Please do take a look. Our next webinar is going to be on repossessions and risk, something quite topical. That's going to be on the 23rd of July from 9 till 10 in the morning. A link to register for that will be sent out tomorrow with the slide deck. So on behalf of IBA, Phil, Stu, Mike and Hash and me, thank you for joining us today, and goodbye.